Buried for centuries, she awoke to the touch of a human miner. The Valdris Mountains held their secrets close, wrapped in layers of stone and silence that had remained undisturbed for millennia. Cale Thorne knew these tunnels better than any man alive, his calloused hands guiding the plasma cutter through bedrock with the precision of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove to the darkness. 7 years had passed since the Kepler station. Collapse had taken everything from him. 7 years of self-imposed exile in these remote peaks, mining rare crystals for the colonial trade routes while avoiding the pity and questions of civilization. The other miners called him the Ghost of Valdris, appearing only to sell his findings, before vanishing back into the mountain's embrace. Today felt different, though Kyle couldn't explain why. His dreams had been unusually vivid lately, filled with whispers in languages he didn't recognize and the sensation of someone calling his name from deep within the earth. He'd learned to trust his instincts in these tunnels. They'd kept him alive when grief might have claimed him. The plasma cutter hummed as it carved through a particularly stubborn section of granite. Cale wiped sweat from his brow, his headlamp casting dancing shadows on the tunnel walls. The air here felt charged, almost electric, making the hair on his arms stand on end. His next strike hit something that shouldn't exist. Instead of the familiar resistance of stone, the cutter skimmed across a surface smooth as glass. Kyle stepped back, heart hammering as he played his light over what he'd uncovered. Where granite should have been, a translucent material curved away into the darkness, pulsing with the faintest inner light. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice echoing in the confined space. Kyle set down his tools and ran his hands over the surface. It was warm to the touch and seemed to respond to his presence, the internal glow brightening slightly where his palms made contact. Through the translucent barrier, he could make out shapes within, organic curves that suggested something had been preserved inside this impossible chamber. His mining experience told him to report the find, to call in the colonial archaeologists and claim his finder's fee. But something deeper, some instinct that had guided him through years of solitude, urged him to continue. Working carefully, Kyle began to clear away the surrounding stone. Hours passed as he slowly revealed the full extent of the chamber, a crystalline sarcophagus nearly 7 feet long, embedded seamlessly in the mountain's heart as if it had grown there naturally. As the last of the debris fell away, Kyle's breath caught in his throat. Inside the crystal tomb lay a woman, perfectly preserved in eternal sleep. But she was like no human he'd ever seen. Her skin held an opalescent quality that seemed to shift between pearl and starlight, marked with intricate patterns that resembled constellations. Her hair flowed around her like liquid silver, and even in repose there was something regal about her features. She was beautiful in a way that made his chest ache with longing he thought he'd buried with his family. Without thinking, Kyle pressed both palms against the crystal surface directly above her face. The chamber responded immediately, its glow intensifying until the entire cavern blazed with soft radiance. Hairline cracks appeared in the crystal, spreading outward from where his hands made contact. "No, wait," he started to say, but it was too late. The crystal dissolved like morning mist, leaving nothing between his outstretched hands and the sleeping woman. The moment his skin touched hers, her eyes snapped open. Eyes like captured starlight, ancient and knowing and utterly alien. She drew in a sharp, gasping breath, her back arching as consciousness flooded back into her preserved form. For a heartbeat, they stared at each other across the impossible gulf between species and centuries, and Kyle felt something fundamental shift in the universe around them. "You," she whispered in accented but perfect standard, her voice like distant music. "You woke me." And in that moment, as her hand rose to cover his where it still rested against her cheek, Kyle Thorne realized his exile was finally over. Awakening hearts, Seraphina's legs buckled the moment she tried to stand. Centuries of stillness having left her muscles weak and unsteady. Kyle caught her before she could fall, his strong arms wrapping around her waist as she leaned heavily against his chest. "Easy," he murmured, surprised by how natural it felt to hold her. "You've been asleep for a long time." She looked up at him with those impossible eyes, studying his face with an intensity that made his pulse quicken. "How long?" Her voice carried an accent he couldn't place, musical and precise. "I don't know," Kyle admitted. "This chamber, it shouldn't exist. None of this should be possible." Seraphina's gaze swept the cavern, taking in the rough-hewn walls and the scattered mining equipment. A shadow of profound sadness crossed her. "Beaches. They're gone, aren't they, my people? I can feel the emptiness where they should be." Kyle helped her sit on a smooth outcropping of rock, noting how her skin seemed to pulse with that inner light when she was distressed. "I've never heard of anyone like you. What are you?" "I was Seraphina of the Luminari," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The last empress of a dying race. We were the guardians of light itself, shepherds of stellar nurseries and weavers of cosmic harmony. But the universe grew dark, and we grew few." As she spoke, the patterns on her skin began to glow more brightly, casting dancing shadows on the cavern walls. Kyle found himself mesmerized by the way the light seemed to flow beneath her skin like liquid starlight. "The void plague," she continued, her hands trembling. "It consumed system after system, turning light into darkness, life into emptiness. My people fought it for millennia, but we were losing. The council decided that some of us should sleep, should wait for a time when the universe might be ready for light again." Kyle moved closer, drawn by the pain in her voice. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand in his. Her skin was warm, almost fevered, and where they touched, tiny sparks of light danced between their fingers. "You've been alone all this time," he said softly, "just like me." Seraphina looked down at their joined hands in wonder. "Your touch doesn't hurt," she whispered. "For so long, contact with others brought only pain, the weight of their fears, and hatreds pressing against my mind. But you're different. Different how?" "Peaceful, wounded, but not broken. There's kindness in you that runs deeper than your scars." She lifted her free hand to trace the lines of worry and grief etched around his eyes. "What happened to you, Kyle Thorne?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He'd spent years avoiding that conversation, even with himself. But something about her touch, her presence, made the words come easier than they ever had before. "Mining accident 7 years ago. I was off shift, but my wife Sarah and our daughter Emma were visiting the station. A support beam failed, and the whole section collapsed." His voice cracked. "I dug for 3 days straight, but we couldn't reach them in time. Everyone said it wasn't my fault, but I should have been there, should have protected them." Seraphina's eyes filled with a luminous substance that might have been tears. "So you came here to bury yourself along with them?" "Something like that." Kyle looked away, uncomfortable with how easily she read him. "These mountains don't ask questions or offer sympathy, they just are. But they brought you to me," she said softly. "Perhaps there's purpose in that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, hands still intertwined, each lost in their own thoughts. Gradually, Kyle became aware that the cavern around them was changing. The walls themselves seemed to be responding to Seraphina's presence, developing the same faint luminescence that marked her skin. "Is that supposed to happen?" he asked. Seraphina followed his gaze and gasped. "The mountain, its luminary work. My people must have shaped this place, prepared it for my awakening. But that means—" She struggled to her feet, suddenly energized. "Kyle, this isn't just a tomb. It's a sanctuary, a place of power. If the mountain is awakening with me, then perhaps there's more here than either of us realized. As if summoned by her words, sections of the cavern wall began to glow more brightly, revealing hidden passages and chambers that hadn't been visible before. Ancient symbols appeared in the stone, pulsing with the same rhythm as Seraphina's heartbeat. "What does it mean?" Kyle asked, standing beside her. "I don't know yet," she admitted, but there was hope in her voice for the first time since her awakening. "But I'm not alone anymore. For the first time in centuries, I'm not alone." She turned to face him fully, her hands coming up to frame his face. "Thank you, Kyle, for finding me, for waking me, for being exactly what I needed when I needed it most." Standing there in the growing light of an awakening alien sanctuary, with this impossible woman looking at him like he was the answer to prayers he'd never thought to pray, Kyle felt something long frozen in his chest begin to thaw. "What happens now?" he asked. Seraphina smiled, and the entire cavern seemed to brighten in response. "Now we discover what we're meant to become together." Shadows of the past 3 days had passed since Seraphina's awakening, and the mountain sanctuary had transformed. Around them, what began as rough mining tunnels now revealed themselves as corridors of living crystal, responding to her presence with warm, welcoming light. Kyle had moved his camp deeper into the complex, marveling at chambers that seemed to grow and reshape themselves according to their needs. The Luminari were architects of possibility, Seraphina explained, as they explored a vast hall lined with crystalline formations that hummed with stored energy. "We didn't build with stone and metal like most species. We convinced matter itself to take the forms we needed." Kale ran his hand along a wall that felt more grown than carved. "How is that possible?" "Everything in the universe vibrates with its own frequency," she said, moving to stand close beside him. Over the past few days, they'd grown comfortable, with casual touches, her hand on his shoulder as she explained ancient technologies, his fingers brushing hers as he helped her navigate unstable passages. "Light, matter, even consciousness. My people learned to harmonize with those frequencies, to sing matter into new shapes." "Sing to it?" Seraphina placed her palm against the crystal wall and began to hum, a low, melodious sound that seemed to resonate in Kale's bones. The crystal responded immediately, flowing like liquid light before solidifying into an alcove perfectly sized for 2 people to sit comfortably. "Incredible," Kyle breathed, settling beside her in the warm crystal embrace. "Your people must have been like gods to the rest of the galaxy." Her luminous patterns dimmed with sadness. "That was our mistake. We thought our light made us superior, that we could guide other species toward enlightenment. But light casts shadows, Kale, and some beings prefer the darkness. The Void Plague wasn't just a disease, it was a weapon created by those who saw our influence as tyranny. You were at war. For 10,000 years, Seraphina leaned against his shoulder, drawing comfort from his solid presence. At first, we tried to cure the infected worlds, to restore the light that the plague consumed. But every victory cost us more lives, and slowly we realized the truth. The plague wasn't destroying civilization. It was civilization, the collective hatred of species who resented our attempts to change them. Kale wrapped his arm around her, feeling the tension in her body as she relived those ancient traumas. "So you went into hiding." The few survivors scattered across the galaxy, seeking places where we could sleep until the universe grew kinder. Some chose isolated moons, others the hearts of dead stars. I chose this world because it felt peaceful, untouched by the greater wars. She looked up at him with eyes that held the weight of eons. "I never expected to wake to kindness. After so much darkness, I'd forgotten it existed." "You haven't told me everything, have you?" Kyle asked softly. "About why you were the last empress, why you were the one who had to sleep alone." Seraphina was quiet for so long that he thought, She wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Because I was the one who failed them all. The admission hung between them like a physical presence. In the silence that followed, Cashel became acutely aware of how her body trembled against his, how the light patterns on her skin flickered with barely contained anguish. The final battle was at Celestara Prime, our homeworld, she continued. I was young for an empress, barely 3 centuries old, but I was the strongest light singer of my generation. The council believed I could turn the tide, that my power could cleanse entire systems of the plague. What happened? I tried to save everyone at once. Instead of targeting the plague itself, I attempted to shield our entire fleet with my light, while simultaneously healing the infected worlds below. The effort, it broke something fundamental inside me. My light turned inward, consuming itself, and in that moment of weakness, the plague fleet struck. Tears of pure light traced down her cheeks, and Cale found himself wiping them away with gentle fingers. Where her tears touched his skin, tiny flowers of luminescence bloomed and faded. Billions died because of my arrogance, she whispered. The survivors scattered, and I was so broken that even touching another luminary caused them pain. So they built this sanctuary around me, sang me into sleep, and promised that someday the universe would be ready for light again. Serafina, Kyle said firmly, turning to face her fully. You were trying to save everyone. The fact that you couldn't doesn't make you responsible for their deaths, doesn't it? Her eyes blazed with ancient guilt. I was their leader, their hope, and He silenced her with a kiss, gentle but insistent, pouring all his understanding into the contact. For a moment she stiffened in surprise, then melted against him with a soft sound of surrender. Her light flared around them, turning the crystal alcove into a constellation of warmth and possibility. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard, the air between them charged with more than just her luminous energy. I spent 7 years believing the same thing, Cale said, his forehead resting against hers, that I should have been there, should have saved them, that their deaths were my failure. But you know what I've learned since I found you. What? Sometimes. The universe takes away everything we love, not because we deserve it, but because we need to become someone new. Someone who can love differently, more deeply, without the fear of loss holding us back. His hands cupped her face, thumbs tracing the starlight patterns on her cheeks. Maybe you needed to sleep for centuries, not as punishment, but as preparation. To wake up exactly when you did, exactly where you did. To meet someone who could. See past your guilt to who you really are. And who am I, she whispered, the woman who tried to save everyone, even when it meant destroying herself. The woman who chose hope over despair, even in the face of ultimate loss. The woman who's teaching me that maybe love isn't about preventing loss. Maybe it's about being brave enough to love anyway. This time, when their lips met, there was nothing gentle about it. Centuries of loneliness met years of grief in a collision of desperate need and flowering hope. Serafina's power surged around them, turning the crystal chamber into a galaxy of swirling light as their bodies pressed together with increasing urgency. Kyle, she breathed against his mouth, her hands tangling in his hair. I can't. If we do this, I won't be able to hide anymore. My power, my presence, it will spread through the mountain, probably beyond. Others will sense me. Then we'll face whatever comes, he said, his lips trailing down her throat to where her pulse fluttered beneath skin like captured starlight. Together. But even as passion flared between them, neither noticed the distant sensor array that had been silently monitoring the mountain's energy readings for the past 3 days. Nor did they see the encrypted message that fired across the galaxy toward a ship waiting in the outer system. A message that contained just 3 words. Target located. Confirmed. In the warm embrace of crystal and light, surrounded by the Echoes of ancient love songs and the promise of new beginnings. Kyle and Seraphina surrendered to the fire building between them, unaware that their time of peace was already drawing to a close. Hunters in the dark, the first sign of trouble came at dawn on their fourth day together. Kyle woke to find Seraphina sitting rigid at the edge of their makeshift bed, her entire body glowing with agitated light patterns that pulsed like a warning. "Beacon, they're coming," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "I can feel them approaching, minds filled with hunger and violence." Kyle was on his feet instantly, years of mining in dangerous conditions having honed his survival instincts. "How many? How long do we have?" "A ship, maybe two, landing in the valley below." Her luminous eyes met his in the crystal chamber's soft glow. "I'm sorry, Kyle. My awakening, the energy we released last night, it was like sending a signal across the galaxy. I should have been more careful." "Don't." He pulled her into his arms, feeling the tremor of fear in her body. "We knew this might happen. The question is, what do they want?" "Me, always me." Her laugh was bitter. "Either to study my power, steal it, or destroy it. The Luminari were hunted to extinction once. Apparently some still remember the prophet. In our bones." The mountain's crystal network suddenly blazed with urgent light, and Seraphina's head snapped up as if she'd heard a shout. "They're not just any hunters," she said, her voice filled with dread. "The ship's captain, his mind burns with familiar darkness. He's touched by the void plague, changed by it." Captain Vex Mordane's gravelly voice echoed through the mountain, passages amplified by some kind of sonic transmitter. "Seraphina of the Luminari, I know you can hear me. I am Captain Vex Mordane of the vessel Shadowhawk, and I've come a very long way to meet you." Kyle grabbed his plasma rifle from where it rested against the wall. "Can we get deeper into the mountain?" "Yes, but—" Seraphina placed her hand against the crystal wall, and the entire chamber shuddered. "The sanctuary is still waking up. Most of its defenses are dormant, and I'm not strong enough yet to activate them all." Mordane's voice continued, closer now. "I bring greetings from the Consortium of Shadows, last inheritors of the Void Plague's gift. We remember your people. Empress, we remember how they burned our ancestors with righteous light, how they tried to reshape the galaxy in their own image. But we survived, and we thrived in the darkness you feared." "He's insane," Kyle muttered, checking his weapon's charge. "No," Seraphina said quietly. "He's exactly what my people created when we tried to force light on those who preferred darkness. The Void Plague didn't just consume, it transformed. It made them into something that feeds on the very light we cherished." A new sound echoed through the passages, heavy footsteps accompanied by the whine of energy weapons powering up. Seraphina took Kyle's hand, and suddenly they were moving through corridors that reshaped themselves as they ran, the mountain itself, helping them flee deeper into its heart. "There," she gasped, pointing to a narrow passage barely visible in the crystal walls. "The old archives. If we can reach them, there might be weapons, technologies we can use." They slipped through the hidden entrance just as the first of Mordane's mercenaries rounded the corner behind them. The passage sealed itself seamlessly, leaving their pursuers to face solid crystal. "Clever girl," Mordane's voice drifted through the walls, somehow still reaching them. "But I have void touch trackers with me. They can smell your light through solid stone. You're only delaying the inevitable." The archive chamber was vast, its walls lined with crystalline databanks that hummed with stored knowledge. Seraphina pressed her hands against the central console, and information flooded her mind. Tactical data, weapon schematics, the locations of other sleeping luminari across the galaxy. "Kyle," she breathed, "there are others, dozens of sanctuaries, like this one, hidden throughout known space. If Mordane has found me, he might know about them too." "Then we stop him here," Kyle said grimly. "Whatever it takes." Seraphina's patterns flared with sudden determination. "The archives show a defense protocol. something called the solar flare array. It can channel stellar energy through the mountain's crystal network, but she turned to him with anguish in her eyes. Using it will burn out most of my remaining power. I might not survive it. No. Kyle's response was immediate and fierce. There has to be another way. There is, she said softly. But it requires trust, complete trust. Before he could ask what she meant, the chamber wall exploded inward. Mordain stood in the breach, his form wreathed in writhing shadows that seemed to devour the light around him. Half his face was normal human features, but the other half was something else entirely, darkness given form, with eyes like hungry voids. At last, he said, his voice a harmony of human speech and inhuman hunger. The last empress, hiding in her crystal palace with her pet human. Two more figures entered behind him, his lieutenant, a woman whose skin rippled with the same dark patterns that marked Seraphina's light, and a tracker whose eyes glowed with sickly purple radiance. You cannot imagine how long we've waited for this moment, Mordain continued, raising a weapon that looked like it was forged from crystallized darkness. Your light will feed us for centuries, and your knowledge will help us find every remaining luminary sanctuary. Over my dead body, Kyle snarled, bringing his rifle to bear. Mordain laughed. That can be arranged. The battle erupted in chaos of light and shadow. Kyle's plasma bolts seared through the air, while Seraphina's power lashed out in brilliant waves. But their attackers moved with inhuman speed and coordination. The void touch seemed to absorb energy attacks, growing stronger with each hit. Then Seraphina grabbed Kyle's hand, and suddenly he understood what she'd meant about trust. Let me in, she whispered urgently. Let me share your mind, your strength. Together we might be strong enough. Without hesitation, Kyle opened himself to her completely. The sensation was overwhelming. Her power flowed through him like liquid starlight, while his steady determination anchored her chaotic energy. For a moment, they were truly one being. Human resilience merged with luminary light. The combined force of their union blazed through the chamber like a newborn star. Mordain's shadows recoiled, his confident expression faltering as the pure intensity of their shared power pushed him back. Impossible, he snarled. Luminari cannot bond with lesser species. You're wrong, Seraphina said, her voice harmonizing with Kyle's as they spoke in unison. Love transcends species, transcends light and darkness, and love is the one thing your void can never consume. Their joined power reached critical mass, and the entire mountain responded. Every crystal formation blazed with stellar fire as the solar flare array activated. But instead of burning out Seraphina's power, it amplified the bond between them, turning their love into a weapon of pure creation. The blast that followed shook the mountain to its foundations. When the light faded, Mordain and his hunters were gone. Not destroyed but banished, sent screaming back into the cold void between stars where they belonged. Kyle and Seraphina collapsed together, their power spent, but their bond stronger than ever. In the settling quiet of the archive chamber, surrounded by the gentle glow of crystal and starlight, they held each other close and began to plan for a future neither had dared imagine. Love's eternal flame. 6 months had passed since the battle with Mordain, and the Valdris Mountains had become something unprecedented in galactic history. A sanctuary where human miners worked alongside awakened luminary technology, creating a new kind of civilization built on cooperation rather than conquest. Kale stood on the crystalline observation deck that had grown from the mountain's peak, watching the sunrise paint the valley below in shades of gold and amber. The mining colony in the distance bustled with activity as word had spread about the incredible discoveries being made in the Valdris Range. But now, instead of simple resource extraction, they were learning from Seraphina's people how to work in harmony with the planet itself. "The morning light suits you," Serafina said, emerging from the spiral staircase that had formed itself to connect their living chambers to the observation platform. She moved with fluid grace, no longer the weakened figure he'd awakened from. Crystal sleep, but fully restored to her power and beauty. She'd changed in subtle ways over the months. The constant grief that had marked her features was gone, replaced by something Kyle could only call peace. Her luminous patterns still danced beneath her skin, but they pulsed now with contentment rather than anguish. "Any word from the outer colonies?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as she joined him at the crystal railing. "3 more sanctuaries have responded to our signals," she said, leaning back against his chest. "The Luminari are waking up across the galaxy, and they're not waking up alone. It seems our bond has inspired others. Human archaeologists working with sleeping emperors, alien traders forming partnerships with awakened light singers. Love, it appears, is more contagious than the Void Plague ever was." Kyle smiled, pressing a kiss to the top of her silver hair. "And Mordain?" "Still hunting, but he's finding fewer prey and more resistance. The galaxy is changing, Kale. Species that have been enemies for millennia are learning to work together, inspired by what we've accomplished here." She turned in his arms, her starlight eyes meeting his. "My people always believed that light was meant to guide, but we were wrong. Light is meant to share." "Speaking of sharing," Kyle said, his expression growing serious, "I've been thinking about something you said months ago, about other sanctuaries, other sleeping luminari who might need help waking up safely." Serafina studied his face carefully. "You want to leave Valdris. Not leave, expand." He gestured toward the valley where human engineers were working with luminary crystal singers to build impossible structures that seemed to grow from the earth itself. "This place will always be home, but there are others out there who might need what we've found together. The combination of human resilience and luminary wisdom. Maybe that's the key to healing the galaxy's old wounds." "It would be dangerous," she warned. "Not everyone will welcome us. Some humans still fear alien influence, and there are other void-touched fleets like Mordain's scattered across known space. Then we'll face them together, just like we faced him." Kyle's hands found hers, and their familiar light danced between their intertwined fingers. "Besides, I've gotten used to a life that's a little dangerous. Mining was never exactly safe. Work." Serafina laughed, the sound like distant music carried on stellar winds. "Very well, my brave miner. But first, there's something I need to show you." She led him down through the crystal corridors to a chamber he'd never seen before, one that had apparently grown during the night while they slept. The walls were covered in flowing script that seemed to write itself in languages both ancient and new. "What is this place?" he asked. "The Chronicle Chamber," she said softly. "It's recording our story and the stories of all the other human luminari. Bonds forming across the galaxy. Future generations will read about the miner who woke an empress with his touch and how their love became the foundation for a new age of cooperation." Kyle read the flowing text, recognizing some passages despite the alien script. Their first meeting, their shared confessions of guilt and loss, the battle with Mordain, and countless smaller moments of tenderness and discovery. "It's beautiful," he said, "but is it really just our story, or is it something more?" "Both," Serafina replied. "We're writing the first chapter of something unprecedented, a galactic civilization where love transcends species, where differences become strengths rather than reasons for war. Your people's determination combined with luminary wisdom, human innovation guided by our harmony with natural forces." She paused before a section of wall where new text was still forming, describing their conversation at that very moment. "The Chronicle believes our story isn't ending here on Valdris," she continued. "It's suggesting that what we've built is meant to spread, to become a template for others to follow, a new kind of empire built not on conquest, but on connection. Kale nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. An empire of the heart. Exactly. Serafina stepped closer to him, her hands coming up to frame his face. So, my love, are you ready to change the galaxy? With you? Kyle smiled, pulling her into his arms as crystal formations around them pulsed with warm, welcoming light. I'm ready for anything. Their kiss was soft and full of promise, witnessed by the growing chronicle of their love and the mountain that had brought them together. Outside, the sun climbed higher into the morning sky, casting its light across a galaxy that was slowly, beautifully, learning how to love across the boundaries of species and time. In the months and years that followed, the legend of the miner and the Empress would spread throughout known space, inspiring countless others to look beyond the surface differences of skin and species to find the deeper connections that bound all conscious beings together. The Valdris Accords would become the foundation for the first truly integrated galactic civilization, built on the radical idea that love was not just possible between different species, it was necessary for the survival of them all. And in the crystal chambers deep within the mountain's heart, where their love had first blazed bright enough to drive back ancient darkness, Kale and Serafina continued to write their story together, one day, one touch, one shared dream at a time. The universe, it turned out, had been waiting not for conquest or conversion, but for connection. And two broken souls, who found wholeness in each other's arms, had shown the way forward into a future bright with possibility. Their love had become eternal flame, burning away the shadows of the past and illuminating a path towards something entirely new, a galaxy united not by force, but by the simple revolutionary power of love itself.